Hi everyone, and good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Razzo. I'm the Senior Strategy Director at ElderWorks, and we're so delighted to have all of you here today. You should all have received an evaluation. So when you do depart, be sure to have it completed, and our volunteers will be happy to take it for you as you leave. And we're always interested in your comments and your input and expertise, so we appreciate that very much. We're very pleased today to have two of our really very important people that do a lot of the work that we do at ElderWorks. As you know, we help seniors like yourselves, families, and professionals finding really any kind of services you need. And we do not charge, we're not for profit. We this afternoon, or this morning rather, are going to have the Veterans Assistance Commission with us, and we have Superintendent Mike Iwanicki and Superintendent Jacob Zimmerman. Sorry, Jacob. And Mike is, of course, Superintendent over McHenry County, and Jacob is Superintendent over Kane County. Both of these gentlemen started their career military-wise, Mike with the Navy and Jacob with the Coast Guard. And from there, they have done so many marvelous things that we need lots of time to really continue and tell you all of the great things they do. But what I can tell you is when you reach out to them or to their offices and the people that work with them, they can direct you correctly, help you with questions you have, and really help you in finding out about benefits as well as other possibilities through the veterans. So I'm going to let you go ahead and start, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Carol. Yeah, the brief introduction was code for, if they asked for a bio, we sent them 3 pages each. We are with Veterans Assistance Commission. The Veterans Assistance Commissions are something that's permissible under Illinois state law. It's generally county specific. There are some services that we can provide to people who don't live in our county, but many assistance, especially when it comes to financial assistance, is specific to the region that we have authority over, MK and McHenry. And ultimately, we're really here to help you. And that's what our job is.
One more time. Oh, come on. There you go.
We had a lot of things we could have talked about, but most of the questions we've been getting since last August have to do with this thing called the PACT Act that passed, was it August 10th? August 10th, 2022. And even though they named a bunch of conditions which are presumptive, which means if your loved one served in the region that was affected or named in there, and they developed that condition, the VA is automatically going to assume it was caused by the military service. But there was other language in the PACT Act which literally could potentially affect any veteran who's breathing. And that's when you get into some of the issues regarding toxic exposures. And that's what this whole thing was really about, is toxic exposures, the burn pits in the desert, Agent Orange, radiation, and other things unnamed. Anybody know what that is?
Satellite.
It's Hubble. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I went crazy on this one. Okay, these are us. This is how great we are. He's great. I'm great. Wonderful. We got through that. Normally, I have applause built in there, so everybody's. Thank you. Okay, first I want to go over some services, and you can jump in here too. Why don't you go over this one? You know what we do.
Yeah, so our job, essentially what I like to say is we're no wrong door for veterans in our county. Veterans and their survivors and their dependents. So if there's a veteran-related issue, veterans can come to us, and if we can't help them directly with things like veteran financial assistance, it's veterans who are generally at the poverty level, or veterans who have barriers to transportation and need rides to VA hospitals or clinics. If we can't do the stuff directly, then we work with a pretty wide network at the federal, state, and local level, including nonprofits, to address those issues. I would say about 90 to 95% of what my office does in Kane County is prosecuting VA benefits claims. So when a veteran wants to file for like the PACT Act benefits or apply for VA health care, GI Bill, anything along those lines, that's 90 to 95% of the paperwork that we do. We don't just fill out the paperwork, we advocate for them, we track it. Call me, not the VA, to get a status update. It's a pretty comprehensive approach to casework. So you want to add anything to that?
No, you just pretty much said it. Trying to navigate the VA is probably the biggest challenge most veterans have. Even the VA had done a report now almost 2 decades ago that basically said it is to the veteran's advantage or the survivor's advantage to find an accredited service officer to help them with this rather than attempting to navigate the VA themselves. That's what we're here for. And nowadays they even say when you're going to find someone, make sure they're accredited. And they talked about that at National, didn't they?
They sure did. The other thing that's important on that is that we help from discharge past death. That's what I like to say. So veterans engage us even before 180 days before they got out of the military to start their VA paperwork, and then oftentimes we're handling their survivor benefits, death benefits, burial benefits as well. So it's very oftentimes when somebody comes in to see us, they're our client for several years, and past death even to help their families.
Okay, the PACT Act clearly covered quite a bit. I wanted to keep you here for at least 3 hours so we could go into depth, but they wouldn't let me. So I was told I had to stick to the 40,000-foot view of what we're doing, or just go over some of the big things in there. The Camp Lejeune Justice Act, there's a lot of confusion on that, in that we get a lot of veterans who say, well, I'm supposed to get my benefits for this. Can I do this? Well, yeah, you can go to a lawyer and you can sue the government and get that, and we'll explain that a little bit more later. And but it was primarily focused on the civilian families and the civilian workers at Camp Lejeune, and gave them an avenue which they could sue the government to recover losses due to exposure to the contaminated water. The Gulf War, burn pits constantly get questions, especially from Vietnam veterans who tell me, we had burn pits in Vietnam, a little different. And then Agent Orange for Vietnam and for some surrounding areas. An interesting thing they did with that law, which I still prosecute them anyway, they wrote it. It originally had the Philippines in, then they took it out. So that's a little more challenging, but they named a whole bunch of new areas that they said Agent Orange was. We used to almost be guaranteed that if someone was in Thailand, that if they weren't security, we had to prosecute that in appeal. Now they said, well, if you were on a U.S. or base in a Royal Thai Air Base or whatever in Thailand, that you're going to get it. Radiation, they added a few new locations, and actually some of the radiation veterans, I believe that goes into the early 80s, the cleanup?
Late 70s, maybe early 80s, yeah.
And as I said, toxic exposures, we're going to get a little bit more into that. We'll hit a couple special notes, and I don't talk about any of this with also not including ALS. So let's kind of get into here. This is what it did. Those are the dates. August 1953 to December 1987, they recognized the water was contaminated. They knew it was contaminated. They didn't do anything about it until they had to admit it, basically, that it was contaminated. And then the VA, for the veterans, came out with presumptive service connection for the veterans. They had some connections for family members who were there who developed illnesses, who could get health care, but they weren't going to get any compensation for those illnesses. They were just going to get the health care. This kind of corrects the civilian end of it. It recognized that civilian workers, veterans, family members, children, mothers who were pregnant, who served who were in Camp Lejeune with their veteran spouse, are now eligible to sue the government. Does that thing close? That closes in August, doesn't it? This month? The lawsuit period?
No, it's for 2 years.
2 years.
2 years after the date, either the date of the passage of law, or I believe when the Department of the Navy rejects a tort claim.
And last I saw, they haven't even addressed the tort claim yet. So, and of course, veterans may sue, but there'll be an offset if they're receiving benefits already. We don't know what that offset will look like. The difference between this and VA disability compensation is you have to prove you were exposed by telling them how you were exposed, not, well, I was on the base. You actually literally need to go into detail because you're going before a judge at this point who's going to make a decision on this. So you absolutely want an attorney. You want an attorney who knows what they're doing. And at National, they gave us the names of the attorneys that can do this.
Yeah, so there's like the VFW, the American Legion, I believe the National Association of County Veteran Service Officers have signed memorandums of understanding or some kind of an agreement with certain law firms. And the big thing there is to cap the amount that the law firm can take. There's, I think, some law firms we heard were going to get like 50 to 60% of the winning or the award of any award from the court. So those who have signed memorandums of understanding with the American Legion and VFW and those organizations, they have the American Legion has made sure that they cap the fees. It's 20 or 30%. It's not nearly, it's not exorbitant like some of the other ones.
But we have no idea what people are going to get in this lawsuit or what it's going to be worth, and the amount of proof you have to present in a court of law to win this is much higher than as likely as not that the VA has.
It's really a bizarre situation. I don't want to get too far into the weeds of it, but any court case that comes under this has to be filed in the Eastern District in North Carolina. So it can't be filed here in Illinois. So you've got to have a law firm that's out there or practices out there. It's really unique in the whole veterans world. There's something similar for radiation exposed veterans. It's called the Radiation Equity, RECA is the acronym, Compensation Act. And those folks who are downwind or participated, civilians who participated in atomic testing or were downwind from the atomic testing could file a claim directly to the Department of Justice. And it worked more like a VA claim did. And there were set amounts that they were going to pay out. I think that's how they should have done this. They didn't, though. They just said, you can sue the government. And so now, is it going to become a class action suit? Is it going to be everybody suing individually? Are they going to have to build a whole new courthouse in the Eastern District of North Carolina to handle all this? It's crazy. So, but the bottom line is none of this comes through our office. It goes through an attorney, but it can impact your VA benefits.
Yeah, and the big thing is if this does apply to you or somebody you know, go to an attorney. Don't go to the site online and start filling out paperwork, because if you make a mistake on the paperwork, you're stuck. It's going to be, that's it. So have an attorney help you with the paperwork. Don't do it yourself.
Mike, can you suggest attorneys that can do that if they call your office? I mean, do you have those
I
names?
believe the American Legion was using Bergman and Moore.
Okay.
That's
And
right.
I forget who NAC is using. I got it written in the office.
Yeah, it's a little unique. We're government, so we can't. There's a favoritism thing. I can't say go see this attorney. So I would say go check with the American Legion. Do your research. American Legion, the VFW, probably the DAV as well. Probably has attorneys, and just
So they
do your
just
shop
get
around
names,
and make sure you're making an educated decision there.
Because he was talking about the agreement, and I would suggest that in the end, let's say I have a case that's going to the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. At that point, I'm out of it, and they get to pick an attorney. I have recommendations of who they pick, but in the end, it's who you're comfortable working with.
Right.
So it's like any other attorney. chances are if they're advertising on TV, you really need to interview them well. Okay.
Cover the deadline, right? It's has to be filed before August of 2024.
24, that's August 9th, 2024. Okay. Okay, burn pits. I was mentioning what was different about the burn pits in the desert compared to the burn pits in Vietnam. Well, for starters, the sheer size of the burn pits, they were enormous. You're talking about people taking cats, big bulldozers, and moving the crap into the fire. You're talking about them putting everything from computers to unused chemicals and throwing it in the fire. In the earlier part of the war, you had the oil wells burning, and there was issues associated with that. That is the key difference between what was going on in the Gulf War compared to what was going on in previous wars, because let's face it, they've had burn pits since George Washington. So this is nothing new. It's just what was new was how big and how much stuff they were actually burning. And a lot of that stuff wasn't around in Vietnam, some of those things. Now for the Vietnam veterans, and they had a thing called stirring shit. And what that was, they had 50-gallon drums that they cut in half and they put in under an outhouse, and that's where the human waste went. Eventually, to clean that out, they burned it. So what did they do? JP4, JP5, which is jet fuels, diesel. I've heard of crazy things where they ignited this stuff with a flare. They'd fill it with diesel, ignite it with a flare, and periodically someone would have to come up with a big 2x4 or a stick, and they'd be sitting over that drum and they'd stir it to keep the stuff burning. Some of your Vietnam veterans who were out in the field, who were junior in their unit, had the privilege of doing that particular job. Does doing that and sticking your head in burning diesel and human feces, is that potential for causing some respiratory problems? I would argue probably. And that is something we can address later under the toxic exposures, but yeah, that potentially could cause some problems. But in the meantime, what this did, unlike what they did with the Vietnam veterans in Agent Orange, the VA said, we believe that these 20 conditions are being caused by the things they were breathing when they were in the desert and these burn pits were going on. And unlike what they did in Vietnam, rather than waiting to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that that's the cause, they said, we believe this is causing it, and they basically made them presumptives. On the other end, with the Vietnam veterans, they had to prove almost beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was actually causing the problem, which was unfair to the Vietnam veterans because some of those conditions, such as hypertension, has been presumed to be caused by Agent Orange because of the statistics for God, how long? And they finally decided to add it. And so they also expanded health care eligibility. So these veterans who are exposed to burn pits, they have VA health care longer. How many people have veterans in your family? How many are using the VA health care? It's a great, great program. I use VA health care myself, and I have the best health insurance your money can buy. So, yeah. So if they're not using it, I recommend they get signed up and use it. And on the other end of that spectrum is, even if they can afford their health insurance or whatever, you never know what happens in the future. At one point in your life, you may become uninsurable. If you're in the VA, they're going to take care of you. And if you have a history of taking those physicals at the VA, then they know what they need to do to get you back to what you were. You want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do. I want to touch on the 20+ presumptive. That kind of understates how comprehensive this is. So when I think it's 23 or 28 conditions. But the conditions are respiratory cancer of any type. gastrointestinal cancer of any type, head cancer of any type, neck cancer of any type. So that law passed last year, a year ago, almost exactly. And to define what a respiratory cancer of any type is, the VA has to go through the regulatory process, propose a rule, which has not been done yet, accept public comment on that rule, and then finalize and publish the final rule to say what those are. In the meantime, because they don't want to hold anything up, they've issued what they call sub-regulatory guidance, where they put a list of conditions together. That list is 280 conditions long. Okay, so to say 20 or 23 or 28 is really understating the issue. Nowhere does it mention skin cancer of any type, but skin cancer is listed as a head cancer of any type. It's also listed as a neck cancer of any type. So it is very comprehensive when it comes to cancers, as well as respiratory conditions. So anybody who has served in a theater of war since Vietnam and has cancer should probably be coming to just have at least a consultation with us to see if it is on one of the lists. Because there are several lists. It's not just Agent Orange. It's not just burn pits. There's Camp Lejeune. There's the Gulf War. There's atomic exposures. There's a lot of different things that are going on out there. And that's aside from every major military base in the country being a Superfund site for toxic groundwater and everything else. So that aren't currently recognized. So.
Yeah, and again, what he said, as far as getting to the neck cancer for the Vietnam veterans, a lot of Vietnam veterans ended up with tonsillar cancer and were denied. Tonsillar cancer is a form of neck cancer. So that's included in there. Not included in Agent Orange, we still have to fight to win it, but the way they're doing things now, it's a little easier. Well, it's different. I won't say it's easier. Agent Orange, incidentally, that's Mars. They added high blood pressure, and the reason I am excited about that, or shouldn't be excited about that, high blood pressure is more than just high blood pressure. Most of the ratings I saw coming back are 0. We get some 10s. But the big thing with adding high blood pressure is what the high blood pressure does to the body. It is more than taking a pill to control your high blood pressure. High blood pressure, of course, is linked to stroke and some of hypertensive heart disease, which basically tells you it's high blood pressure. But it's very common in people who have atrial fibrillation. And we're getting a lot of claims approved for that. It's common for people with high blood pressure to develop erectile dysfunction if they're male. It's not unusual for them to develop, these are all things you can claim with VA. It's not unusual to have vascular issues as a result of high blood pressure. It's not unusual to have eye and kidney problems as a result of high blood pressure. So that was a really big deal, not just for the high blood pressure, but for the conditions high blood pressure can cause a person who's got the high blood pressure. Megas, that is basically a blood disorder. It is an extra protein in the blood. I have filed for that before this had passed, and I usually had it approved for a judge because for Agent Orange, they're already doing leukemia. This isn't a far stretch. But it's another condition they added, and it's very rare. Very few people will have that. Have you run into any of these yet? MGUs?
I think it's like 0%.
I don't think it was on the cases I did. I think I had like 20s. But the Air Force bases in Thailand, like I mentioned earlier, they added Laos. We had a lot of clients over the years who said they were exposed in Laos. Well, it's finally in there. Cambodia was added. Guam and America Samoa to July 31st, 1980. And you don't even want to venture a guess why Johnson Atoll was there. When they were getting rid of the Agent Orange, that's where they took it to be destroyed. And that's why that's there until 1977. And if you look at some of the pictures of what they took over there to the Johnson Atoll, some of those barrels were so old you couldn't tell what the band was on it. the ban told you what chemicals were in there. And Agent Orange got sand because it was an orange ban. But they had a rainbow of defoliants that they were using out there, and the stuff they took over to Johnson Atoll, who knows? A lot of those things you just couldn't see what the ban was. Allegedly, because the United States hasn't acknowledged it yet, but Okinawa, when they cleaned up that area, the Japanese were complaining that there was contaminated soil all over where the naval base was, and a couple other locations. And they're blaming the United States for chemicals there. Again, I've been filing cases on it, haven't won one yet because the government hasn't acknowledged that that's really happened, because they haven't seen it, the Japanese haven't.
So, if you were to file a claim, and then obviously it's denied or whatever, but if they ever come back and quote unquote correct that at Okinawa, you get backdated to the day that you filed?
Maybe.
It's the government. Right?
So you see that with Agent Orange veterans because of a court case. So the Niemer court case allows for, so I had a guy who had applied for a heart attack he had in 1985 or 1986 related to Agent Orange. The VA didn't recognize that until 2010. They had to back him to 1985, and it was like $575,000 he got back then. Everybody else doesn't get that, all the other cohorts, and that's only with the Agent Orange under the Niemer. But that doesn't mean that somebody's not filing a lawsuit today against the government that's going to change that. So that's why we say maybe.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I would rather file it and have it denied and have it on record in case something happens later where they make it so we can say, we filed this before, and you said no. Because you never know how, if Congress adds it, you never know what Congress is going to do with it. You know, sometimes like when they passed diabetes being related to Agent Orange exposure, they were allowing, I believe, 2 years of back payments if the person filed. And if they was under Niemer, they could go all the way back. But I believe with the diabetes, they had specific language that basically invalidated Niemer, which wasn't there in 2010 when they added the heart disease. But I remember doing the claims. The farthest I can get them to go back was 2 years. But that was a long time ago. That was 2002. I've been here a little while. Okay, so that's Agent Orange. And I'll have more to say about that in a bit. Radiation exposure. You're good on radiation. You want to hit this one?
Yeah, so the interesting thing on this is the list of conditions, which is a bunch of cancers, hasn't really changed. The PACT Act didn't change or update that. What they updated is where it impacted. So previously it was folks who occupied Nagasaki or Hiroshima after we dropped the bombs over there. And also who participated in atomic testing in Nevada or the Pacific Proving Grounds. What happened, there's a few incidents we've had over the years, one in Thule at the Air Force Base in Greenland, one off of the Mediterranean in Palomares, Spain, and then at Iwanicki Atoll. The first two B-52 bombers that were carrying nuclear bombs had accidents. The one in Thule, Greenland, the airplane caught on fire because of a cushion and a heater, and they ditched the B-52 right into the ice in Greenland. And the bomber, the B-52 over Palomar, Spain, it was getting refueled over the Mediterranean. There was some kind of an incident. The two planes collided. A lot of service members died in that, but a few lived. But there were 4 thermonuclear weapons that were jettisoned as part of that. One of them crashed into the Mediterranean, and if you've seen Men of Honor, where he's trying to get away from the ship that's coming, that's actually, they're looking for the bomb from that was jettisoned from Palomares, off of the coast of Palomares there. The other 3 detonated on the beach or the beach area at Palomares, Spain. Obviously not a thermonuclear detonation, but the high explosives detonated and scattered the radiation all over the place. Well, in those 2 incidents, we sent a bunch of Air Force people over and told them to shovel up the contaminated soil I think 2 to 5 feet of soil in Palomar, Spain were loaded into 55-gallon drums, and then we shipped them over to the Savannah River site in South Carolina and buried them in the ground. What happened to those Air Force guys? Well, they started to get the same sicknesses that the people who were participating in atomic testing or occupying Hiroshima and Nagasaki after we dropped the bombs. The VA did not recognize that those illnesses were related to their service. Similarly with Iwanicki Atoll, we sent Air Force guys over there to clean that up in the 1970s, and yes, you're right, in the early 1980, or late 1980, I guess there, to clean it up, and they came across the similar illnesses. Now, the first time I heard about the plight of these folks was in American Legion magazine. They had a big article about that. So anybody who's not sure if they should join the American Legion or whatever, they do a great advocacy work, and they've been working on this for several years now. I'd say that article was probably 7 or 8 years ago when I saw that. But anybody who served and participated in those operations are now covered under the presumptive cohort for atomic veterans.
Okay, next. Okay, this is the one that I said pretty much is a catch-all. The VA is looking at toxic environmental exposures a little differently now, and this is one of the big things the Act does, because everything we're talking about so far is about environmental exposures causing people's illnesses. The military is notorious for not having OSHA on every ship, platoon, or Air Force aircraft or Marine unit out there. For whatever reason, OSHA doesn't want to be on the battlefield. But the military is all about mission effectiveness. It's about taking care of the ship. Yeah, you want the guys to be comfortable enough to do their job, but they're not necessarily looking for you to thrive, and they don't put out lazy boys at the workstation for you to be comfortable. They put out the minimum. The example I use, I don't know if the VA specifically mentioned it, they should. Trichloroethylene. Trichloroethylene is my favorite example because I fought like crazy to get as much of it on my ship when they made it illegal in 1985. So the stuff was fantastic. It has been used since the 1940s. It was a degreaser. Most of your mechanics use this stuff. You would, for cleaning switchboards, I'd have a 5-gallon drum. I'd hook it up into low pressure air, and we'd just spray the switchboard and watch the dirt and grease and grime disappear. Didn't know where it went, but it did disappear. And we used it for controllers. Auto mechanics used it to degrease. Your tank mechanics, heavy equipment mechanics used it. Everybody was using it because it worked fantastic. Unfortunately, it was causing all kinds of respiratory problems and killing people. Kind of like another great product. What is that? The insulator? Asbestos. Great product. Worked fantastic. Unfortunately, it kills people. It did exactly what it was supposed to. And that's another example. You all, on the commercials, you hear about, were you in the Navy? Did you serve in the Navy between these years? Boiler techs were especially exposed to asbestos all the time. Another example, and I keep using shipboard, maybe you know a few others. In the ships, the engineering ratings, especially if they were on a steam plant, those engine rooms were extremely hot. You had solvents, you had grease, you had oils, all kinds of things that were atomizing in the air because of how hot it was in there, and they're breathing this stuff in. This is an argument you could actually bring to the VA. They're going to look at it differently. Is it guaranteed they're going to rate it and say, yeah, that's what's causing it? No guarantee. But it's guaranteed not to be addressed if you don't bring it up. Yes, ma'am?
So when they use that to clean the sensor for the water that feeds the ship, wouldn't everybody be exposed then, not just...
The way I understand how the VA is looking at this, because I've done a number of trichlor claims, they're looking at it who most likely was going to be using it day to day. So The ratings, they're looking at the person's MLS or their rating, military occupation specialty, their rating, to see, is it likely that this person was going to be using this particular chemical in the day-to-day course of their job? You know, when I said in 1985, when we were told that we're no longer going to be able to get trichlor, I literally went to reach out to just about every naval supply area to find as much of it as I could get, because I was leaving the military in 1986, and I didn't want to run out of it. I did run out of it. So that's how, and again, they told us it was because it was burning a hole in the ozone, but it was also causing health problems, and that's probably part of the reason. But stuff like trichlor, it just gives you an example of the chemicals and the exposures that every veteran, you can go back, if they're breathing, there's a possibility that they were exposed to something that they didn't want to have. Do you want to add anything to how they're doing the toxic exposures?
No, those are just great examples that you made, and I would say not just breathing, but drinking too.
Yeah.
Drinking the water, and even like I think trichloroethylene specifically atomizes like in a shower head. So like when you're taking a shower, if it's in the groundwater, you're also breathing it in when you're taking a shower. So that's something that they looked at in a study I think that came out of Italy. So there's, you know, great website. If you are bored like me and can't fall asleep at night, go to Google bombs in your backyard. It's a website by ProPublica that looks at the formerly used defense sites, and you're going to see colored dots all over America. And it's you can click on any one of them, and it'll show you like the Savannah Army Depot in Illinois, or the Kerr McGee factory in West Chicago, all over the place, all over the Chicagoland area. You click on it, and we use it for defense for some reason, and there's contamination in the ground. And it's very eye-opening how widespread this toxic problem is.
And it's amazing how many Superfund sites, like you mentioned earlier, were former military bases or on current military bases.
So has much work been done with women-specific cancers, like breast cancer or, reproductive cancers or something like that? Have they began to address any of what causes of this stuff that I've had?
When someone comes to my office, it's specific to them. One of the things I do is the American Academy of Medical Sciences, they provide the VA with a lot of information. The VA participates with published reports in there. So let's say I have a client who is serving in Fort McClellan, which had a plant near it that kind of caused some contamination, airborne contamination, and they're suffering a reproductive issue. We definitely look at that. We know Agent Orange caused reproductive issues for men and women. We know that there is some stuff regarding the burn pits that would affect women specifically. Is that the question you're asking? Okay. The thing is, it's case by case. I'm giving generalities because they wouldn't let me keep you 3 hours.
Yeah, right. So, I'm just curious if they're starting to look at that more and more now.
Yeah, and I would say Fort McClellan is in this PACT Act legislation. They actually ordered the VA to study the issue, just like they do with Agent Orange and all 4 veterans and everybody else. Study the issue of Fort McClellan because that's been brought up several times, and I believe that was one of the primary training locations for women in the Army. So there's been a lot of talk about that being an issue and affecting women who have served in the military, and it all comes out of the genesis for those health issues comes out of Fort McClellan, but there hasn't been any pen to paper on it. This starts the study for that.
Okay.
So that's a good thing. It's a move in the right direction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so, like I said, toxic exposure, all veterans, all eras. Yeah, unfortunately, and I'll get into it again a little bit.
Quick question.
Yeah.
And this is getting further and further away from the actual veterans, but what about the children of the veterans? If they're having problems.
They don't care about us.
Yes, she's correct to a certain degree. If the VA takes care of veterans, so veteran health issues. Now, there are some programs that compensate dependents and things for that, but it's all related to the veteran's health, not the dependent's health. The exception to that is spina bifida that comes out of Agent Orange benefits, but those folks who served at Camp Lejeune, base housing on Camp Lejeune had the same contaminated water. The veteran is the only one who's able to file a claim to the VA for that. And that's something that Congress writes those laws on who gets benefits under Title 38.
The only thing up until recently with the Justice Act was
Yes.
if they could get health care
But not
if
the
they had
compensation.
certain conditions.
But that's a statutory problem where a congressman has to fix that. But that's why you can sue them now too. So
So if the veterans pass, they're out of luck.
Well, I'll talk about that later. I'll get to that.
Are you going to print all this stuff out?
It can be made available from,
I think it should be on.
it'll be on your website, right?
Yes, okay, on our YouTube channel as well. And then we also have information in our directories, which are right out here. But we should be running this through our YouTube channel, the presentation again.
Okay.
Incidentally, that's Venus, the most toxic planet in our solar system.
We ship stuff, stuff there, sorry.
Okay, maybe. They can't even get probes to survive there. Okay. So this is where we get into questions, but there was one more thing I was going to discuss, and I discuss this at every one. And I use ALS as an example. ALS was determined to affect all veterans, all eras, who were in the military for 90 consecutive active duty days or more. If that person, any time in his or her life, develops ALS, it's considered service-connected. Why is that important? Because that went into effect in 2008. How many died before 2008? We talked about an act adding heart disease in 2010 for veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange. How many people who are veterans died of heart attacks prior to that act happening? The VA is pretty good at getting their network out to let the veterans and the service organizations know that these things are up. Not so much with surviving spouses. Just because a veteran didn't get the service connection while they were alive and they changed the law later doesn't mean a benefit may not be available to a surviving spouse. The surviving spouse isn't going to get VA veterans disability benefits, but they do have something called dependency and indemnity, which is like an insurance policy against loss. And that is a benefit that surviving spouses can apply for if their husband or their wife died of something related to their military service, even if they were never service connected for it. So what we usually recommend, especially with the PACT Act, I mean, this opened up all kinds of things. You know, people who were denied, who filed for and were denied service connection for their stroke, and they were exposed to Agent Orange, and that stroke was caused by high blood pressure, and they died 10 years ago because of it. If that surviving spouse is still around, they can apply. ALS, if their husband died in 1995 from ALS, they can go back. If they're not remarried, they can file and get that benefit.
So what is that?
What's the number on that right now?
1562 per month. Tax credit.
And what do you have, I mean, is there any income restriction?
No, it's not income based.
It's like an insurance policy against loss. So you're being paid it because your spouse died because of their military service. And you also get health insurance with that. You also get education benefits for that. You know, there's some nice things you get along with
If I
it.
could piggyback on that, Mike. My name is Steve Wells. I'm with the Kane County Veterans Assistance Commission. Earlier I was speaking, we're outside, and I had a surviving spouse come up. Veteran served in Vietnam, called to death, had nothing to do with Agent Orange. However, this veteran suffered from diabetes. She potentially could be eligible for that same dependency and indemnity compensation if that death is determined to be, if the military service is considered to be a contributing cause to that death. Okay?
Right.
So like, maybe it's on the death certificate. You ever seen the Illinois death certificate? It has like part 1 and part 2. So part 1, especially in COVID-19 times, they were putting COVID-19 on part 1. But then the veteran maybe had diabetes or had hypertension. Maybe it was listed on the death certificate, maybe it wasn't. Regardless, that surviving spouse should file for that DIC benefit.
And they can do that through a VSO.
Absolutely. Yep.
Highly recommended you use an accredited VSO for that.
So are those backdated to the date of the claim too, or they start when they get?
Generally not.
Okay, so it's when it gets, how long does it take to get approved?
Right now, because of the PACT Act, how long do CDICs take?
PACT Act
8 months.
I got a Thailand one that's like 2 years old right now.
Yeah, they're taking a while. Part of the problem is the PACT Act. It was passed in August 10th, 2022. By August 31st, 2022, the VA was 200,000 plus claims over what their normally expected load of claims, and this has continued. We're at national, what they say, 2.5 years before they think they're caught up.
Yeah,
to a
something like
normal-
that before they get down to, they want to process these claims in 125 days or less. So that's, our job is to make them as efficient as possible when they go in, but it's still just there's so much volume. And I look at those numbers every week, and the weekly numbers that came out this week, there's more claims pending for veterans in Illinois than there ever has been in the 12 years I've been doing this. So it's just continued to tick up, and I don't know when that's going to plateau or start to fall. But it's still going up as of this week.
When I started, it took 18 to 24 months to get any kind of claim in. And right now, and I remember when they got it down to 4 months or less, and now they're ticking back up. And so not sure how long it's going to take. As far as backdating, there are some situations where it can be potentially backdated, especially if the veteran had identified that they had that problem before. We talked about NEMR a little bit earlier, which only applied to in-country Vietnam veterans. That expired, except for Blue Water Navy veterans, because they were so late in coming on, and I believe surviving spouses.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah. Other than that, that expired for the veteran, those except for Blue Water Navy vets. Yes.
Why ALS specifically?
Because that is the one that I found more people knew nothing about. Because I'm going to share a story. When they passed that, it was huge. Those of us accredited service officers who knew about it couldn't get the word out fast enough. I knew people from another agency who challenged us because we were telling people if their loved one had ALS, it's an automatic 100% from the VA. And they said there's no such thing as service connection for ALS or that. And we actually ended up sending that agency the reg proving it was. That was what we were running into, because it was almost like this was some hidden magical thing that no one seemed to know about, including other agencies. We knew about it in ACT.
Yeah, I think your question might be more of like,
The
why does the VA?
rationale for the causation.
So I've tried to research that issue. I don't think they know what causes ALS to begin with, right? They think it has something to do with head trauma, is what I've read. But there's a 60% higher chance that Mike and I are going to get ALS in our lifetime than somebody who didn't serve in the military. That's what the etiological studies have come up with.
And it was
But they don't
twice
have a
the-
rationale.
They don't know
for the
why that
causation.
veterans are 60% more likely to get ALS than civilian counterparts.
They said, like he said, head trauma. They looked at stress. They're just
what I
not
was thinking.
sure
Yeah.
what it is, but something about military service. It was even higher for those who served Desert Storm forward, the Gulf War. They just don't know. but it is a big deal. In MS, if somebody catches MS within 7 years of leaving the military, it's considered part of the military. And you can prove those cases just by looking at symptomology and what was he complaining about, while he was at the doctor. Oh yeah, I kept dropping glasses, my fingertips were numb or something like that, and then they turn out to be having multiple sclerosis, MS. So that's evidence that you can prove to the VA that they had it and that he was complaining about symptoms related to it. But these are all things that if you don't ask, you're never going to have an answer. And as far as the ALS, I push that hard. I push the heart disease hard at stuff like this because these are things. I mean, what's the average lifespan of somebody who was just diagnosed with ALS?
Not long.
5 years or less.
Yeah, minutes.
It goes fast. I can share a story. I had a surviving spouse. Somebody helped her get a disability pension. She was getting a pension, survivor's pension from the VA. You talk about being impoverished, look at the numbers for survivor pension. That is very, very low. We found out her husband had actually died of a heart disease related to Agent Orange. The VA knew about it for years. We just turned it in. She ended up, instead of owing the VA money because they said she was in an overpayment, they owed her over $100,000. We've had, and I don't want to get too much into the pension poachers, but there were some organizations that would convince people to file for pensions and they would charge them a lot of money to do it. We had a World War II survivor come in. Her husband died of a disease commonly associated with being a prisoner of war. Here they're deciding whether or not to go with this company that was going to charge them money to get a pension, and she was entitled to dependency and indemnity, which has nothing to do with income, because her husband died from a condition related to being a prisoner when he was in Germany. So these things, that's why you go to an accredited veteran service officer. Normally at these functions, I like to bring the Veterans Benefits Manual, the one we get, 8.5 by 11 by almost 3 inches thick now.
Like 2 phone books.
And yeah, and then there's a book that explains it. So that's a little bigger.
So which spouse? I've been married more than once. So which spouse would be eligible for?
If you divorced and got remarried, if the first spouse was the one that you divorced, you no longer have a legal connection to that individual. So.
Unless you divorce after the age of, or remarry after the age, or no, divorce is their death. If the spouse died, I think you can remarry after 55 or 57 and it doesn't matter.
Something like that. Yeah.
That's a big age.
Say that again.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a general question. Is there an office where a veteran can go to figure out what the benefits are?
Sure.
Somewhere in the Northwest, here in Cook County?
So like right where we're at right now, I refer you to Hanover Township. They have a Veteran Services Office. That's going to be the best tailored to service this area. If you're in Kane County, DuPage County, McHenry County, the Veterans Assistance Commission is the place to go there.
This would be very local in
Yeah,
Northwest.
Extreme Lake,
Chicago.
Bartlett, Cook County, Elgin, part of Hoffman Estates, Hanover Township would be the place to go.
Hanover Township. And what should the person look for, like their phone number? Or anything?
If you were to Google Hanover Township Veteran Services,
Veteran Services.
yep. I think it's I looked at it yesterday for somebody.
Or you can just grab one of our cards and
Yeah,
we'll be happy to
we'll
tell you
push
where
it
Do you
to go.
have a card?
We'll tell you where to go.
And do you or do you know of anybody that would give programs on veterans benefits? Not
I-
necessarily, just the basic.
Okay, I frequently do.
Okay.
If it's out of county, I have to get permission from my commission to do it. because they don't like me to leave the county. This is one of the exceptions because this particular fair encompasses multiple counties. But as a general rule, I'm sure you would go out in Kane County anywhere to do it. I have actually done a presentation at Lutheran General Hospital Advocate.
Because I was interested, I'm in charge of the care ministry in our church, and that was one thing we wanted to work on, was a program for the church members.
Where's the church located?
Barrington, South Barrington. So it's Cook County.
Yeah, they would probably be okay with it because it's not just over the border of McHenry. But there is a Cook County BAC, and I don't know, are they doing presentations to anybody yet?
They're getting their feet wet.
Because
Stay tuned. We're going to get them here next year. I'm going to leave and they're going to come. That's what we're going to do.
No, you're going to stick around, buddy. I'm going to leave. So,
I mean, once you hit 100% for disability, is there any reason to keep filing claims for new conditions as they pop up, or should you just not bog the system down, or?
it depends.
It's permanent.
I've had discussions about what the VA calls permanent and total, because if you look at the regulation, it says expected to last the lifetime of the veteran. It doesn't say it will last the lifetime of the veteran, and it has conditions which they can reverse permanent and total. So to me, permanent and total, the simple reading of the language means now and forever and all-encompassing. But when you read the regulation, that's not what it says. So I've always had a difference of opinion on that one.
They're situational. I would say talk to an accredited veteran service officer to see if the juice is worth the squeeze.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Usually I'm looking, is it going to give you more money or will it kill you? And if, I have this broken toe in the military and now I've got arthritis in it, I'm going to file it, chances are I'm going to say, don't stir the hornet's nest. If you come in and you tell me, oh, my heart condition just got worse, I have this LVAD in me now, even though you're 100%. Does everybody know what an LVAD is? It means that the left side of your heart is no longer operating, so they got a machine that does the pumping for you. With the LVAD, I know even though you're 100%, now you're going to get into special monthly compensation, and you're going to get more money, and eventually, because there's a lot of maintenance on somebody who has an LVAD, eventually you're probably going to be in a nursing home, if not dead. That's it. But we're all going to be dead eventually.
Mike and Jacob, excuse me, because it's very interesting, and I told you they know everything and can help you with everything. And thank you very much also to the other gentleman that jumped in. We appreciate it very much.
We're at booth 600 if you have any more questions.
Yes, exactly. They're here, booth 600, and I'm only interrupting because we now have to move towards lunch, so we don't want to miss that. Thank you so much.